It's my pleasure now to introduce you to a board member from the organization Dignity and Power Now. They're based in LA, grassroots organization that was founded in 2012 to fight for the dignity and power of all incarcerated people, their families, and their communities. Marc Anthony Johnson, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm blessed. Welcome back to the front page.
Oh, thank you. It's always great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we know that you guys never stop fighting, but it's not always in the news. It's more happening behind the scenes. We've seen some huge strides in the last 12 months, right? So I guess we'll start with this week and work backwards. This week, the LA County Board of Supervisors voting to eventually, or actually pretty soon, close Men's Central Jail in downtown LA. Tell me what that really means.
Yes, and again, thank you so much, Dominique, for covering this. It's such a really monumental and historic moment that we are in. Men's Central Jail represents really a horrendous history of incarceration in Los Angeles. It's the site of many abuses of many of our loved ones who have been incarcerated in that facility. It's an old, dilapidated facility, and it represents at the core, one of the things we've been saying, that you really cannot get well in a cell, and that incarceration has not solved the fundamental crises that Los Angeles must deal with, such as houselessness, such as a lack of access to fundamental care, mental health care, things like that. And so what happened yesterday was monumental. We were able to, as you said, after a year of changing the tide and moving the county away from a reliance on incarceration, but towards a public health approach to meeting our people's needs. And we were able to move the county to take a stance and say we are going to close Men's Central Jail. And what we are going to do in Los Angeles County is actually figure out what it would take to close that facility within the next year. And so when we say what it would take, we're not starting from scratch. We actually have tremendous amounts of data. We have programs that have been tested that show that we can actually reduce the jail population even more than it's been reduced in the wake of COVID-19. In this very moment, when COVID-19 hit, we were able to reduce the jail population by roughly 5,000 people at the beginning of the year. There were 19,000 people in the county jails. And because of COVID-19 and because of the pressure by folks on the ground and because of the coordination by folks in the county, we saw a very swift response to get people released and an acknowledgement that one of the worst places for people to be during a pandemic is in a jail. And very quickly, people moved to get people out. We saw the reduction of that jail population by roughly 5,000 people. And an acknowledgement, it really shook some of the fundamental assumptions about why we're jailing people in the first place, and what are actually the strategies we can use to get people out that are not only safe for them, but safe for the broader community. And we have those strategies. And so what the next year will be assessing those things, using the practices that work. But also, in addition to that, what also happened yesterday, which is really critical, is that the county created an ATI fund, an Alternatives to Incarceration fund, that they are putting millions of dollars into. Again, not to invest in solutions that we have yet to create, but actually invest in solutions that we already have a plan for. And you and your listeners can go and look up Care First, Jail Last. It is a county report that was developed over a year that lays out 114 strategies that we can use to stop our reliance on policing and jails and invest in meeting people's needs in ways that also produces the safety that we all deserve, the dignity we all deserve, the well-being we all deserve.
Well, I think you made a lot of great points. Radio Free 102.3 KJLH, Compton, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Inglewood. I mean, first of all, people always talk about, if we let people out of jail, doesn't it make our community less safe? And that, it sounds like that's what you're reflecting when you say we know how to do this.
Certainly. And I think it's important for folks to understand that at the beginning of this year, we were walking into January with already some clarity that when we divert people who are in jail, who have needs, such as mental health needs, into housing that is connected to treatment, into housing that is connected to building community, you see tremendous results, right? The unfortunate reality is that our sheriff has been using misinformation to talk about the outcomes that I think we should be celebrating right now. And the sheriff will have us believe that when we divert people out from jails, it makes our communities unsafe. But in fact, what we know is that the average recidivism rate, and when I say recidivism, I mean when someone goes to jail or prison and they are released, do they end up back in jail? And the average recidivism rate in California is roughly 50%. It's roughly 60 to 70% when you're looking at people with mental health disabilities. So that's what the sheriff would claim he wants to continue doing. Those are the outcomes he wants to continue investing in. But when we look at the programs of work, such as the programs we have with the Office of Diversion and Reentry, which we know at the beginning of this year, it was confirmed by a study, an independent study that showed that we could divert up to 70% of the mental health population in the jails using programs that have recidivism rates of 14%. That is a dramatic reduction. That is a huge success when you're talking about 86% success rate for people who are being released into housing plus treatment. 91% of people who are diverted into housing, into treatment, into communities, they actually stay in those programs after a year. 74% stay in those programs after 2 years, right? And again, that 74% means folks who stayed in the program. That doesn't mean the folks who left actually ended up back in jails and prisons. And so when we look at the facts are actually very promising in terms of what we can do to invest in the dignity and well-being of our communities, and also how public health approaches actually benefit public safety.
Wow. I think the point about the studies and the groundwork that's been done is important too, because when we talk about things like, defunding prisons, defunding police, or like, as I like to say, reallocating resources and, outlining our priorities in a different way through the budget, people think we're talking about suddenly yanking the rug out from systems that support public safety, instead of understanding that there's been a lot of groundwork that's been done.
That's right.
Over the past several years. So I think it's really important that you point that out. Part of that groundwork was the Reform LA Jails legislation, right?
That's right.
So talk about that. It was a huge victory. I know Dignity and Power Now had a big part to that. And also, voters overwhelmingly supported it before we started marching in these streets.
That's right. What we know is that people who will vote have made it clear in Los Angeles County that we want a different reality. We want a different vision. We don't want the history that Men's Central Jail represents, the history that Twin Towers Jail represents, the history that Century Regional Detention Facility, the Women's Jail, represents, where our folks are walking out with more trauma, more disability, more illness, not connected to services, with our families more disintegrated, right? And so Reform LA Jails was a phenomenal signal and statement that voters made to Los Angeles County saying, look, we want a different Los Angeles. And when Reform LA Jails, when the ballot Measure R passed, in Los Angeles, it really said a statement to the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors. And what that statement was is that not only do people want things like our Civilian Oversight Commission to have more power, more ability to actually look at the data and get behind the walls and the secrecy of the Sheriff's Department, but also we want a different reality. And what Measure R did is it says that we have a responsibility to actually stop the construction of jails in Los Angeles and reallocate those dollars into our dignity and well-being, into services, into housing, into things that actually stop our people from going into jail in the first place. And when you look at the success of Measure R with the success of the coalition work of Justice LA, of which Measure R is a part of, right, is connected to, you see the work that's been done over the last couple of years where folks on the ground, people who have loved ones who've been incarcerated, folks who've been incarcerated themselves, have been leading a conversation and leading policy changes, leading the drafting of policy that is translating into a very different reality, a very different Los Angeles than we grew up in. And I'm very excited, I'm very humbled, I'm very encouraged by this moment, because we are going to see the shifting of resources in a way that's actually going to create more promise for our people's lives.
No doubt. I think, a lot of people maybe voted for reform LA jails. Obviously, they did. It was like 70% of voters or something.
Yeah.
But I don't know that everybody understood how many different community-based organizations came together to make that happen, and that it was truly something that came from the grassroots. And one of the reasons I think that's important is because, well, two things. One, right now we see the Black Lives Matter, a movement for Black Lives, the marches nationwide. According to the Washington Post, like 13 million people across the country have marched, which is very much critical mass. But I feel like this moment is different because of that groundwork that was done around Reform LA jails and some of the work that you guys are doing in Dignity and Power Now, so that once this moment comes, we're able to leverage it into, things, as you say, that are at the ready, like a people's budget, like,
That's right.
This Care First Jail Last report. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing is that, a lot of people don't care about who the president is, or they don't think, the Democrats and Republicans are that different. But I think this Reform LA Jails movement and this work right here shows how our votes make a difference and a real impact on a local level.
It's so right. I mean, you're so right, Dominique. And I think what we are seeing is we are looking at an opportunity to really change what our daily lives look like and feel like, right? When we look at, because we're in budget season right now with the Los Angeles County, I think it's important that folks understand that this is the moment where the county is going to decide on what our budget is going to be, what we're going to fund over the next year, right? And what I think is really critical is that we have a county that, between 2016, 17, in that kind of a 2-3 year span around that time, you see the pouring over $120 million into policing sheriffs, into policing places like East and West South Central, places like Compton, communities that are at least 40 to 60% Black, right? And so we may not be able to know or see the dollar amount, but we could feel it in our lives. We could feel it by the level of sheriff presence. We can feel it by the level in which our folks are being policed and incarcerated. And many of that is for public health related things. And so we're in a moment now with the move that happened yesterday, with the Care First Jail Last report that happened at the beginning of this year in March, to actually shift that, to say that $120 million can be spent on something else, can be spent on our people's lives, can be spent on our people's futures, can be spent on our actual health and safety. And those things are not contradictory as our budget has made them before. And so we're very excited about this moment. We're very excited about what the promise that Measure R, that the budget process that we're putting forward with the People's First, the Care First budget has for Black people in Los Angeles County and South Central.
Wow. I mean, it's well said. So give me just sort of an overview of some of the different organizations that have been involved with Dignity and Power now in this work.
Certainly. I mean, you have really powerful and wonderful organizations who've been grinding with DPN. You have folks like CURB, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, which is producing a tremendous and really amazing budget analysis, looking at how do we shift budgets away from carceral approaches to actual public health approaches. We're looking at folks like the Youth Justice Coalition, which has been fighting for the safety and well-being of young people across Los Angeles County, and has been really critical and moving the county to close roughly 9 youth detention facilities and camps with that vision in mind. You're looking at certainly my organization, the Frontline Wellness Network, which has organized healthcare providers to say, look, we have a stake in this, and as healthcare providers, we have to show up. And we're the ones who see people in the emergency rooms, and we see people in the jails, and we know that we cannot actually do our mission of producing well-being for Black and brown people when we are forced to do this in the presence of sheriffs, in the context of jails. And actually, there are safer alternatives. You see organizations like White People for Black Lives, like SE Justice Group, like La Defensa, who are looking at the whole picture of the criminal legal system and the whole picture of our communities, and multiple people who are affected by the system that we are trying to change. And so those are just some of the groups. There are many of us who are out here fighting and who are rooted in the leadership of folks who've been impacted by these systems throughout our lives. And many of us have grown up here in Los Angeles. Many of us have lived here in Los Angeles, and we're going to continue to do that work as we push forward.
So 5:13 in the morning, we are talking with Marc Anthony Johnson of Frontline Wellness Network and also Dignity and Power Now. And a lot of people are talking about, the marches, even the Blackout Tuesday, petitions, so many things going on now, and wondering if it's making real change. I did a piece, I do these, it's called Call to Consciousness, every afternoon at 6 p.m. on KJLH. And one of them, I was arguing that actually we are seeing change unfolding in real time. Of course, we could see more, but I see concrete changes happening, cities, counties, states, and even at the federal level before our eyes. What's your take? Is this translating into real change, or is it, is it connecting to a movement, or is it really just a moment?
I think it's a great question. And I think when you look at the really amazing work that folks like Black Lives Matter have done, when the organizations who make up the Movement for Black Lives ecosystem have done, I think what's important for people to understand is that there's been this national rallying cry to defund the police, right? And that didn't come out of nowhere, right? That came because people have been organizing since for a while, for years now, and for decades now, but certainly since 2012 when Trayvon Martin was killed, and 2014 when Mike Brown was murdered, and 2015 when Sandra Bland was murdered, right? And so in every year that we've had a flashpoint where protests have happened, they have not been spontaneous, but people have been organizing. Every year where we've lost someone else, and we know the list of names, and there's certainly more names that we have had to tragically add to that list this year. But at every moment, new organizations have developed, and organizations that have existed have deepened their roots in the community, right? And we've tested things, we've pushed for things, and we've seen what works and what hasn't, right? And so in this moment, where you see millions of people in the streets, not just in the United States, but across the world, calling for Black Lives to Matter. That is what movement looks like. And I think we should declare it not as a moment, but as a movement that has been built over certainly the last decade. And we're seeing that change, as you said it so clearly, that we're seeing that change happen. We're seeing the results happen. We're seeing, folks like BLM Los Angeles, who's been moving a people's budget that has gotten over 50,000 people in Los Angeles to say, hey, look, we need to move resources away from things that are harming our people, like policing and probation and those type of things, into things that bolster our safety and produce our well-being, right? Like housing, like mental health care and the like, right? Those are the things that we need. And I would say the same thing is true on the county level, right? Where we're seeing this massive shift. We're seeing, ground zero in this particular moment, Minneapolis, where they have moved successfully and crossed major milestones to dismantle their local police department and rethink public safety, to actually establish a department of community safety. We're actually thinking about many of the things that we're talking about here. And so the solutions are very similar, right? And so, again, that's because we've been pushing, so at least since 2012, but certainly before that. And we can see that is producing results, and it's producing stronger movements. It's producing a lot of clarity. And, I think one of the examples of that, and I'll just name that one of the really amazing things that also happened on Tuesday is the Movement for Black Lives launched the Breathe Act. And the Breathe Act is a comprehensive federal bill that really is saying, look, all these organizations across the country have been fighting, have had really clear demands, and also really clear policy decisions for what our world should look like. Well, how can we make that happen on the federal level? And I encourage everyone to really go look at the Breathe Act and check it out, and you'll see a really inspiring set of demands that really reflect many of the things that we're trying to push here in Los Angeles and that many other organizations and Black-led organizations are pushing across the country, that we have the opportunity to move.
Excellent. What let me take a break right here. I'm getting caught up in what you're saying. We'll take a break right here, and we will continue when we get back. Of course, family, you're always welcome to call 520-KJLH, 520-5554. Love to hear from you. I really want to talk concrete steps about what people can do. Not everybody can march. A lot of people, especially our front page family, they are maybe high risk. They need to be at home. They need to stay at home, and I want to encourage you guys to stay home. We don't need thought leaders, change makers, committed activists to be out of commission during this election season or making a transition because you feel like you need to be marching because everybody's marching. Everybody can do a different piece of this puzzle. And so I want to talk with you, Marc Anthony Johnson, about what those pieces of the puzzle might be that people can tap into. I also want to remind you, family, we do have a show now on Saturdays. It is the Front Page Saturday Town Hall edition. It's from 8 to 10 every Saturday. And this week we're going to be talking about education. We had big news on education yesterday with President Trump saying he was going to try to force schools back into session. Meanwhile, here in the state of California and in LA, we're hearing that because of the surge in cases, we might not be able to reopen our schools. That's what we'll be focusing on Saturday. What will the protocols look like? How is education going to look? Also, how are things changing for college admissions and testing and all of those things? And the great Dr. Harry Edwards will be one of our guests, so I'm very excited about that, sociologist Harry Edwards. So that's coming up on Saturday. It is the Front Page, and it is Total Talk Expression Radio Free, 102.3 KJLH.